number 24912. Again, the application of Apache Corporation for the adjudicatory hearing to contest the division's conditions of approval on Apache Corporation's scope of work for additional investigation in Lee County, New Mexico. This is an evidentiary hearing. Last that we were at, we had just finished with the first witness for Apache. Mr. Mullenberg, will transfer back over to you. I believe you can continue with your next witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just as a housekeeping matter, I should move the admission of Apache exhibits B1, B2, B3, and B4, and B, which is Mr. Bowles' resume.
Okay, Mr. Tremaine, do you have any issues with that?
No objections.
Okay, it will be entered. Mr. Mullenberg, before we start, I apologize now that I'm thinking about it. Mr. Rubin is not going to be with us tomorrow, so maybe the issue that you have, we could start now before you bring on your next witness, so we could kind of get that going. Okay. I don't want to get too far in and then we don't have Mr. Rubin here with us.
Fair enough. I think we can do it now. I was thinking of doing it at the beginning of the division's case, but now is fine. Mr. Chair, Commissioners, Mr. Rubin, this morning I indicated that I had a pre-hearing issue that had arisen based on some information received last night. And it pertains to, I'm just looking for the number, OCD Rebuttal Exhibit 9, which consists of original conditions of approval, but also some proposed supplemental conditions of approval that I understand the division would like the commission to consider. And our view is this hearing, as stated in our application, should be limited to the issue of the division's original conditions of approval of the May 8th, 2024 plan. And we have a number of concerns about supplemental conditions. First of all, as I just indicated, we think they're outside the proper scope of this hearing. There's a question whether they're proper as rebuttal exhibits, although perhaps that deserves some further explanation to ascertain what they're rebutting. And perhaps most importantly, we received these late last evening. Apache has not had a reasonable opportunity to review them, consider them, prepare testimony on them, consult with people in operations who may be affected by them, to really even develop a position on them for the commission's consideration. So for that reason, we would object to the division's exhibit, a rebuttal exhibit 9, and the commission's, particularly the commission's consideration of the supplemental conditions shown in that exhibit.
Mr. Burley, just a point of clarification. You're not objecting to rebuttal exhibit 8?
No, we do not object to rebuttal exhibit 8.
Okay. If we could hear from Mr. Tremaine, Mr. Chair, that would probably be appropriate.
Yeah, Mr. Tremaine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, commissioners, and Apache. So there's actually, let me start out by saying, we've heard, the conditions of approval that OCD has submitted in rebuttal exhibit 9 are directly in response to Apache's exhibit C. I'm going to start off by saying that in terms of the timing, I am quite sympathetic to Mr. Rollenberg and his concern there. The concern on the part of council that they certainly need time to respond. But the timing of that exhibit as a rebuttal exhibit in those proposals entirely hinges on the timing of OCD's awareness of the content of Apache Exhibit C. And I want to clarify at the get-go that we're not implying anything with the timing of Exhibit C, that fourth quarter monitoring here. It is part of our presentation that today that the Apache, I've basically said we felt to have drug their feet on some of these steps. But in terms of this particular report, my understanding is that the 3103 constituents came back in late December. So their Exhibit C, even though it's my understanding that the chloride and the TDS samples came back earlier, I think that we got it from Apache within a couple weeks turnaround, right? So they got the samples back, submitted the complete report with the 3103 constituents to OCD, and then OCD that came in by email to OCD on the 8th, which is fine. It has not been submitted, as far as I'm aware, through OCD permitting, so it's not in the well file. It was not processed as such. My understanding is that the individual received it, informed Apache to submit it through OCD permitting. We're not taking issue with that. I'm simply lining out that there is a concern due to the timing. And so as the trailing exhibit in what are Apache's 1,391 pages of exhibits, it's an expansive record, OCD required some time to respond to that, and we've been processing through all of that information, particularly the new information, which is 143 pages long. Earlier this week, it came in on Thursday, and so OCD needed time to respond. The conditions that are proposed are directly germane to the actual content of the samples and information contained in Exhibit C. So I think if I can analogize to a rulemaking, this is very much would fit under like a logical outgrowth analysis. So they are not a part of the original conditions, but they are directly in response to an exhibit filed by the applicant. And when we get into the content of that exhibit, the samples show marked departures concerning departures from the previous samples. That necessitates a different response. So, we've heard you heard Mr. Bull testify earlier this morning that it was inappropriate to require additional wells based on a single sampling event. But what the record shows is that we actually now have two sampling events since around the time that we were discussing these conditions of approval. The second one being this fourth quarter report that we're talking about. And that's the one that's of the most concern to the OCD. So while Mr. Muhlenberg absolutely needs adequate time to respond to those conditions of approval, it would have been completely inappropriate for OCD to fail to respond to the concerning content of the fourth quarter sampling event. And if there is a necessary remedy here, it's to provide an appropriate and reasonably short period of time for Apache to respond specifically to those conditions. It is not, as these are directly germane to the content of this hearing and application, appropriate for the commission to exclude consideration of those conditions entirely. The effect procedurally of excluding Exhibit 9 and not considering additional conditions that are directly in response to the fourth quarter sampling event would be that OCD would have to then issue new conditions of approval, to which Apache, presumably because they objected to the previous conditions, would appeal. And we would be back here in 3 to 6 months past the 3-year mark talking about the same thing based on samples that were taken in October. So on one hand, from the lawyer's perspective, I understand Mr. Molenberg's concern, and we need to make sure that they have an opportunity to respond. But I absolutely feel that these conditions are appropriate for consideration in the record, and they are directly in response to Apache's own exhibit. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, this is a difficult, like most evidentiary issues, this could go either way, I feel. On one hand, it is important to be mindful of not giving, the government is always charged with presenting a moving target. In other words, this licensee thought they were appealing one proposed set of conditions, and now they have a different set. Would they have acted differently? Is there a moving target? That is a consideration. On the other hand, there is no pre-file testimony. There is nothing that would have prevented any of the division's witnesses from merely testifying as to what additional conditions might be appropriate based upon the disclosure in December from Apache and what they could serve. So we're just getting in written form what they could have testified to based upon what they've seen in December. So that practical matter, if there was pre-file testimony, I would not be saying that, but there is not. And finally, I think what maybe should perhaps tip the balance is if it is truly rebuttal testimony in the form of an exhibit. And Mr. Molenberg, I know you alluded, you were sort of equivocating. I'll give you another chance. Do you believe that this at least is a rebuttal nature to what your client filed in December?
No, I do not. And let me explain. And it was helpful to hear Mr. Tremaine's explanation of that. The exhibit provided some new information, and obviously the timing was unfortunate, but we felt it fair to go ahead and provide that information. When you're looking at rebuttal, though, it's rebuttal to testimony. And obviously you have not yet heard what Apache's testimony is about this exhibit. Frankly, it's largely to give the commissioners an update with the latest available data. So for that reason, I don't think it's proper rebuttal testimony. And if you look at the contents of the conditions, they're conditions on operations here. There are conditions that, at least based on the glance we've had an opportunity to have at them, I don't see how there's anything in the exhibit, which is basically a monitoring report, that would relate to those things or make those kinds of conditions proper as rebuttal testimony. Mm-hmm. And finally, I would just say, and I think Mr. Tremaine mentioned this in his opening, a commission order on whether or not to uphold the conditions of approval, which is the issue in this hearing, isn't going to be the be-all, end-all final piece of this case. As we've seen, it is kind of a moving target because, as our folks have explained, you get information, you assess it, and then you make reasoned decisions about next steps. And unfortunately, when you're dealing with groundwater, that takes a little while. It's not an instant thing you can do. So, and I would just add finally, if the commission does choose to consider these things, I think, first of all, it does raise an appeal issue. And second of all, it would be only fair to continue the hearing to allow Apache an opportunity to reasonably consider these conditions and prepare testimony to respond to them.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I think Mr. Molenberg makes both sides make some good points here. The point that Mr. Tremaine makes about if we do not allow you to consider this now, it's going to come back. They will impose them. The division will then impose them at a later time. and we'll be back here again. But it does seem like no matter what we do here, there's going to be some additional data that's going to come down, and there's going to be a subsequent appeal in all likelihood. I don't think we're going to avoid having these parties in front of us at a later date with more data regardless. If Mr. Mullenberg's concern about allowing more time for his witnesses to prepare a rejoinder could be accommodated, could be scheduled, that would certainly warrant allowing the commission to hear Exhibit 9 at this time. Didn't sound like we're going to be completing this today anyway. So those are my thoughts, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. It's not a clear-cut decision.
Excuse me. I'd like to open it up and see if the other two commissioners have any questions. I do have one question, but I'll start off with my co-commissioners here.
Yeah, so just one. So my question to Apache is, through the hearing, the commission can also impose additional conditions as well, as we see fit. I don't know, I think that is a possibility too, right?
Yes, Dr. Mpoma, it is part of your statutory obligation if you feel like it is protective.
Exactly. So then I don't see any problems with the, let's say, the supplementary one, because it is more or less up for discussion too. But definitely you might also need some time to respond to it as well. But I don't see any problem with it.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Bloom?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think my question to both parties here would be, it's two questions. What does more time look like? Would tonight be enough, or do we need to, move this to a future meeting, a future time? And well, let me leave it there, and I'd just like to hear what you think about that.
So I'm just going to dovetail on Commissioner Bloom's. That's my question as well. What does more time look like?
Mr. Chair and commissioners, I doubt if tonight is sufficient. There's given some of the scope of these conditions and operational conditions, which we've never seen before, my guess is that Apache would need to consult with some other folks who are not here. I don't know who's available or anything else. So I don't think I could say with any comfort that we could be ready to put that case on tomorrow. And I mean, again, as to the timing, I think there's a supposition here about there will be other appeals. I don't know that that's something that should be assumed at this point.
Mr. Tremaine?
So we broke down Exhibit C and drafted the conditions yesterday, which is why I noticed them last night. So our staff who are here to testify, this Brandon and Mr. Powell and Ms. Ramiro, did this yesterday. I'm not going to speak to what Apache would have to do differently on their side, but this is something that once we got to it, saw the, I'll let Ms. Ramiro testify to this later on, but the samples that came back in Q4 are quite concerning. So time is of the essence here, frankly, and the so I think given our turnaround, I think we're talking about a matter of a week or a couple weeks, not months, because we do need to get some kind of resolution. It is OCD's increasing concern that there are additional potentially ongoing sources. We'll talk about this more later, but given the spacing in between all of these sample points, we can't possibly tell from these reports where, if there are any ongoing releases are occurring. And it's very important, given how long this case has gone on, to get that shortly. So I do think we should give Apache some time to respond to that, but that's simply necessary. But I think a couple weeks, no longer than 30 days. I would hope that the conditions would be able to be responded to within a week.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I do think there is a path forward there if a week or two would be sufficient, maybe not ideal, to come up with, to allow Apache to avoid unfair prejudice. That would avoid certainly an appellate issue. And if there is certainly the status quo, it needs to be resolved. There is a pending issue. If especially Mr. Mullenberg, would 2 weeks be sufficient to avoid unfair prejudice?
Mr. Hearing Officer, probably depends on what happens in 2 weeks. I think 2 weeks is enough time to assess and perhaps discuss the conditions with the division, see if we can work things out. That may be an option. I don't know if that's enough time if we need additional witnesses given these conditions. And I could see the potential need for an operational witness given at least one of these conditions. So if you're speaking in terms of 2 weeks to return to the hearing with witnesses ready to go, I don't know that I could commit to that. I think 2 weeks is enough time to at least assess them and figure out what the response would be.
Well, Mr. Tremaine said up to a month is what he was comfortable with. Is that something? I'm talking about like scheduling the continuation of this hearing. Would 30 days be beyond the pale for you?
Yeah. So I mean, if you set a continuation for say 30 days out, and then depending on what the initial assessment is, we can advise whether we need a hearing on that or not. If that's kind of what you're thinking, that may make sense.
Well, I mean, this commission is entrusted to protect and avoid and the harm that they've seen evidence of. I was thinking more of 30 days to have a hearing, not to assess.
Yeah. And actually, just to clarify, my answer really is the same. I think if you set a continuation of the hearing 30 days out,
Okay.
that should be enough time to identify and get witnesses present. We might just have to have a little flexibility, date-wise for scheduling purposes. But again, we can put people on remotely too, I suppose. So.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I would recommend, based upon what we've heard from Apache's counsel, that it would be probably in an abundance of caution to allow to hear what we can hear today, and then have a hearing no later than at approximately 30 days out. That would avoid the argument on appeal that they've been unfairly prejudiced.
Mr. Chair.
I see your hand, Commissioner Bloom. I was going to turn to you.
Yeah, I don't want us to get too far down the road here. Is there a possibility that Apache's response could result during this time in the production of more material that would require a response from OCD? And if so, how would we account for that?
Forgive me, Commissioner Bloom. I didn't quite get the question. Can you repeat it?
Sure. So what are we expecting from Apache afterwards? And could there be production of material from Apache that would require a response from OCD, or that OCD would like to or feel obliged to respond to?
Commissioner Bloom, members of the commission, I think what we've heard is that there won't be any additional facts. We won't have any more data in 30 days. It's just going to be what the parties are arguing should be done with that data. So I think that should alleviate the concern of what OECD may need to respond to. I think now that all the data is in, I think there's that we can have a finite point.
Did that answer your question, Commissioner Bloom?
It did. Thank you.
Okay. So I believe, Mr. Rubin, as you mentioned it, and I believe this is what I'm hearing from the parties, that we hear the case as far as we can while we're here now, and then continue the part that would include this Exhibit 9 until Apache had time to be able to get a response and any human resources that would need to be used for a response. Is that what I'm understanding?
Mr. Chair, yeah, that is my understanding as well, and we would hopefully be able to, while everyone's here, schedule that additional day of hearing within, again, about 30 days out, so that the parties have that time. That would certainly spur whatever negotiations they need to have between them in the interim.
Okay, so just, and Mr. Rubin, this is more directed to you. Procedurally, we just take the case all the way up until this exhibit, or do we stop after Apache provides all of their information and then pick up again with the OCD at the later date?
That is a very good practical question, Mr. Chair. Certainly Apache's case was premised upon what they've already had as proposed conditions by the division. So if they feel like they can put on their case now, to the extent they can, we should defer to them to the extent they're comfortable with it. And then as to the witnesses of the division, to the extent they can lay some testimony down that was not contingent upon this new information and upon the additional permits that the conditions they're proposing, we should get that done as well. And take it as it comes. And I think the parties could probably sort out what should happen now and what should be left for the next day.
So then we'll switch it over to you, Misters Mullenberg and Tremaine. Do you think you can continue with the case up until now, until we cover everything that we were planning to outside of this Exhibit 9 and then pick up with Exhibit 9? How do the parties feel?
Well, let me bring in another consideration, and that is whether we should plan on going through tomorrow. My expectation at this point in time is that we can probably get through our case pretty easily today, but it really depends probably on the cross-examination and the commission questions. If that happens, perhaps we're at a logical starting point to pick up with the division's case in a second piece. I mean, that might be one thing to consider. The other thing I was thinking about when Commissioner Bloom was raising his question is just sort of some procedural options. Maybe like a status report and a supplemental pre-hearing statement a week before, due a week before we start up again, which I think is consistent with your rules, and I think addresses the question about, okay, what new witnesses and evidence may come in, and the department having some, or the division, I'm sorry, having some time to prepare for that.
Okay, Mr. Tremaine.
I think that Mr. Mullenberg does identify a logical breakpoint. And I don't want to be over dramatic here, but I do need to emphasize the urgency that is the basis for why OCD responded with additional conditions. If we became aware of samples taken in October in another context that showed these chloride levels, and there was no complete delineation from an operator in January, we would be probably talking about issuing a notice of violation for various different aspects of Part 29. And I think that what we want to present to the commission, if possible this week, is our concerns with that Exhibit C, because it can be interpreted to imply there are additional, if not ongoing, releases. And there are immediate response requirements that trigger once there's documentation of such a release. And we're not aware of any immediate containment actions taken by Apache here. So I do understand we may have some difference of opinion as to what some of that data says. And I think it's the division's preference, if we could, to present the division's testimony, even if we have to go into tomorrow, so that we've set the stage, and then I will happily agree to let Apache come back and reopen their case in response to that Exhibit 9.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I think you've heard it from both sides. That we'll sort of take it what we can now, leaving open this additional day within 30 days for what needs to come after. And if there is some additional, I'm sorry, Mr. Tremaine.
Sorry, another wrench for the works. If we schedule this out 30 days, I just want to remind the commission and all the parties that we are stacking this right on top of Good Night, which is going to be quite a full week. I'm not in that, but in terms of scheduling, the specter of adding another day of hearing in February is daunting. So please consider that.
And I would like to just interrupt as well, Commissioner Bloom. I know I see your hand. Give me 1 second, if you don't mind. It's also smack dab right in the middle of session. And I do know Commissioner Bloom, myself, probably also Dr. Mpoma. No, you don't have to deal with the session. Oh, you're lucky. We'll have that to balance as well in there. So we want to be cognizant of that. Commissioner Bloom, sorry, go ahead. Commissioner Bloom, we can't hear you.
Thank you. I was just going to flag what Mr. Tremaine had raised, which is that, 5 weeks from now, on the 20th, we're beginning the Empire Goodnight Midstream case. I think the 13th, Thursday the 13th, puts us 4 weeks from today. So I don't know if we want to talk dates now, but perhaps as we're moving here, people can look at their calendars and think about the 13th and 14th. Yes, the legislative session is going to be an obstacle. I mean, I'm running our signature piece of legislation. I don't know if I'm going to have to pop out at times or find somebody to cover or how we're going to handle that. So there's kind of a lot at play.
So, and commissioners, please, by all means, step in as well. I'm going to make the suggestion that we keep going with this case as far as we possibly can, and making sure that exhibit number 9 is definitely the rebuttal exhibit from OCD is definitely kept on the back burner and maybe not commented upon until we have the ability for Apache to make a response and to get the necessary response for that. So my suggestion is that we continue with Apache's part today. If it spills into tomorrow, go into tomorrow, pick up with the OCD, the division, let them say what they need to say up until the point where we come to this rebuttal. And at that point, I think, and we may just have a natural break in witnesses at that point as well, where we just then pick up at a later date within a month, within those 30 days. Councils, how do you feel about that? Or Mr. Rubin, is that okay?
Mr. Chair, the one question I have, is there a way to change on the ground what the status quo is right now so that the time is not of the essence?
Mr. Mullenberg, your microphone, please.
Sorry, Mr. Hearing Officer, funny you should say that because we were just consulting about that idea. I would suggest, I think we would be happy to discuss that kind of approach with the division, given some of the timing exigencies here. And there may be some things that, as between the division and Apache, we could agree to go ahead with, and as you say, change the status quo and move forward on some things. And I mean, Apache's not, in fact, I think there are some things Apache would rather get in and do. You have the issue of one mobilization versus two, perhaps, but anyway, I think that's something we would be interested and willing to take up with the division and, perhaps at a break or something, see if we can get anywhere with that.
That would be wonderful to have that in place, or at least know what those discussions amount to, if they were fruitful before the end of tomorrow. Because you can't put it back in the pipe if it comes out, of course. We all know that. Okay, thank you.
So, Mr. Rubin, are you suggesting that we take a break so that the two parties? I apologize. I didn't understand it all. So,
Well, if Mr. Tremaine isn't here in person, but if Mr. Tremaine and Mr. Muhlenberg feel like they can talk for a few minutes, and that's kind of spur of the moment.
It is kind of spur of the moment. My suggestion is, why don't we get at least the two Apache witnesses on?
Okay.
And then perhaps that's a good time to take a break, and Mr. Tremaine and I can consult about perhaps the best way to proceed at this point, given both the time exigencies and, not causing too much confusion and difficulty during the hearing, because there could be delays as we sort of get to the, okay, what should we go ahead with and what should we not? Those kind of procedural things. So,
Mr. Tremaine?
I concur with that. It's going to be challenging to transition to that, take a break. I think we should get through what Apache can fit into today, and then we'll plan to start tomorrow. But I'm happy to fit in a conversation there, and we can even if it extends into figuring out responsive actions and talking through some of that data and Exhibit C at the beginning of next week. I think that's still much more preferable to kind of just, punting a prospective resolution into late February. So we're more than happy to engage in that. And we may, I think from what I'm hearing today, we may be able to find some alternative middle ground for response actions. So we'll try for that tomorrow or at the earliest date possible and commit to getting an update. If we can handle any outstanding immediate response concerns under Part 29 in the next week or two, then OCD may well be agreeable to scheduling the revising our position or scheduling the follow-up hearing after the Goodnight Empire matter, which would give everyone some breathing room.
Okay. Commissioners, are you okay with that? Commissioner Pomley?
Yes.
Commissioner Bloom?
Yes.
Okay. So, what do we need to do procedurally? We could just continue from here?
Yes, Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I think we should proceed forthwith.
Okay. So then, Mr. Muhlenberg and Mr. Tremaine, you guys will talk at a later point. So let's continue with the case, Mr. Muhlenberg. You can call your next witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioners, Apache calls Mr. Larry Baker, and I don't know if we'll be using first names, but Mr. Baker goes by Bruce. So,
okay, Mr. Baker, if you'll come right up here and sit down, and our court reporter will swear you in. And please don't forget to turn on the microphone. Go ahead. We could swear him in. He's ready to go. I think our court reporter is having some technical issues. So give us, there you go. Nope. You just muted yourself. Unmute again. There you go.
Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Excellent. Thank you. The witness has been sworn in. Mr. Muhlenberg, please.
Thank you. Mr. Baker, would you please state your name and current address?
Yes, my name is Larry Bruce Baker. I currently reside in Midland, Texas.
And on whose behalf are you providing testimony today?
Apache Corporation.
Did you provide a written resume showing your educational and employment history and experience for purposes of this hearing?
Yes,
And was a copy of your resume, to your knowledge, provided as Apache Exhibit A for this hearing?
yes.
Do you have any updates or corrections to the written resume?
Yes, I do. The only change is in my employment history. I was let go by Apache at the end of 2024. So I'm no longer employed at Apache Corporation.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Baker. Would you please give us a brief description of your educational history?
Yes, I have a bachelor's of science degree from Eastern New Mexico University in wildlife fishery science and a master of jurisprudence from Texas A&M and with an emphasis in energy and environmental law.
Thank you. And can you briefly summarize your employment history and work experience?
Yes, I began working in southeastern New Mexico in 2007 for Rice Operating Company as an environmental technician. I later went to work with Rice Consulting and Safety as a project manager for consulting purposes, and began my job at Apache in July of 2013.
And your last position at Apache was what was your title?
I was a senior environmental specialist.
Okay. And do you recall about when you took that position on?
I want to say it was in 2024, I believe, maybe first quarter, but I'm not 100% sure.
Okay. Well, let me ask you to describe your responsibilities as a senior environmentalist specialist and maybe just so we reach back and cover the time period that we're interested here, tell us if your responsibilities were different, let's say from 2019 to 2024.
I would say no. I've always been tasked with handling soil remediation for Apache and spills with the division since my employment at Apache. So the specialist role may have led to some other things that I got involved with, but as for purpose of this hearing, I don't think my role didn't change with the title change.
Thank you. Can you give us a rough estimate of the number of contaminant delineation projects you've been involved in during your career?
That one's a hard one. I kind of figured it up. I'm comfortable with saying probably over 250, but that number could be larger because, like I said, I've been doing this since 2007 in southeastern New Mexico.
What is your knowledge of the East Blindberry Drinkard Unit or EBDU numbers 37 well?
My knowledge is the wells is located in the Eunice area in section 13, township 2137, and it's associated with an injection well.
And what kind of injection well? Can you describe that a little further? Is it salt water?
I believe so. Yes, sir.
Okay. And is there also a pipeline associated with the well?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Are you familiar with a release that occurred along a pipeline near the EBDU number 37 well in July of 2019?
Yes.
And what was the approximate location of the release?
The release happened at the junction box, approximately 700 feet east of the well site.
Okay. And what was your involvement regarding the reporting of the release and the immediate response?
I was notified by production and EHS that a release had occurred. I believe I notified the agency because of the volume. That would be typical. And then we followed up, I believe at that time, my direct report filed the C-141. And then we went into the delineation phase.
And is the C-141 filed for this proceeding as Apache Exhibit A1?
Yes, sir.
Does the C-141 identify the volume of liquids released?
No.
And can you explain a little further why that is?
When the spill was reported to me, there was a volume. Upon reviewing the site and getting a better look at it from my perspective, it was obvious that spill volume was not close or even correct. At the time of reporting it, it would have been hard without, we had to go through some one-call notifications and things of that nature to start gathering data. And so I felt it would be better to call it unknown because that would put us into a higher stringent level of delineation. And I felt like that was appropriate.
After or perhaps during the reporting of the release, did Apache take some immediate actions in response?
Yes, I can speak to that. We did. We were very concerned of that low-lying area. That was priority. And I was concerned at that time because I did not know the depth to groundwater, and we knew the well was there. And so we took immediate action, I believe, in July of that year to try to assess that situation and see what we had. And I believe we started excavating in the playa relatively shortly after the release occurred.
Okay. So after the reporting of the release and maybe the initial actions, did Apache prepare a remediation plan for submission to the division?
Yes.
And do you recall who actually prepared the written plan?
Larson and Associates prepared the plan. I reviewed it and submitted it, I believe.
Okay. And is it your understanding that remediation plan was submitted as Apache Exhibit A2 with Apache's pre-hearing statement?
Yes.
Can you briefly describe the contents of that remediation plan?
The remediation plan was to address, was basically a 4-foot dig in areas, the upper portion of it, to install a 20 mil reinforced liner. We were going to gather sidewall samples every 200 square feet. And we had a proposed clay liner originally for the low-lying area. That's what Larson and Associates proposed.
Okay. Do you recall if the remediation plan itself contained any groundwater quality information?
Yes, I believe so.
Do you recall if it contained any information on water quality samples taken from the windmill?
I can't relate at this time.
Okay, fair enough. Did the division review and approve the remediation plan?
Yes.
Do you recall any consultation with the division about additions or changes to the remediation plan?
I don't remember any changes, although I do think there was some conditions of approval. And if I'm correct, they asked for 2 more wells to be installed.
Okay. And do you recall an addendum to the remediation plan that addressed those 2 additional wells?
I can't recollect the addendum.
Do you recall us discussing an Apache Exhibit A3, which is an email from Mark Larson to Bradford Billings dated December 23rd, 2019?
I'm sorry, I can't.
Okay. We'll come back to that at
Right.
the end, and maybe I'll if you could be ready to pull that up. What was your involvement in the implementation of the remediation plan?
I My involvement typically in remediation is getting the contractors established, consultings, reviewing. I'm basically oversee it as a company representative, the work and make sure it's done in accordance with the plan.
Okay. Did Apache complete the work required by the approved remediation plan?
Yes,
And do you recall around the time frame of when that work was done?
I want to say it was around September 2020.
And do you recall a document where the division approved Apache's completion of the backfill operation during that excavation process?
Yes,
And do you recall, for example, that being an email from Mr. Billings at the division to Mr. Larson around September of 2020?
yes,
And did we discuss that being Apache Exhibit A6?
yes.
Okay. After the plan was implemented, did Apache prepare and submit a closure report to the division?
Yes, for the soil remediation.
Okay. And do you recall the date of the closure report?
I think it was dated December 2020 and was filed in February of 2021, I believe.
Okay. And to your knowledge, was that closure report provided by Apache as Exhibit A5 to its pre-hearing statement?
Yes,
Did the division review and approve the closure report?
yes.
Did the approval of the closure report conclude all of the matters relating to the release?
I would say no.
Okay. And for example, did the closure plan itself commit to additional quarterly groundwater monitoring?
Yes.
And do you recall how many monitoring wells were in place or to be installed and monitored per the closure plan requirements?
I believe originally there was 2, and then at some point we put in 2 more that would have probably been part of the closure plan.
Okay. Was Apache's response to the release, including the preparation and implementation of the remediation plan, consistent with your experience with other projects performed in New Mexico under division supervision or oversight?
I would say yes to that. I use the same tactic and approach that I have on almost every project that I've done since 2013. However, there was a little bit of speed up in that low-lying area to try to gain a better understanding early on.
Okay. Mr. Baker, does that conclude your direct testimony, or do you have any other things you'd like to add?
No, I think that concludes.
Okay. Would you be available in the event that we need to have you comment on the division's witnesses' testimony?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Pardon me? Oh, yeah. Mr. Baker, I moved on past an email we mentioned, but it's we're going to pull that up here, I believe. Yeah. Is that okay if we pull up the Exhibit A3 here and allow Mr. Baker to take a look at it?
Yes, Sheila, can you give Ms. Castellano, please, control?
Okay. Mr. Baker, let's see if we can scroll to the top here. Do you see an email on your screen from Mr. Larson dated December 23rd of 2019 to Mr. Billings?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And does seeing this information refresh your recollection of some of the discussions between Apache and the division regarding the remediation plan and some additional work?
Yes, yes, okay. I'm getting my dates confused. This was an addendum to the remediation plan prior to approval, okay, or maybe after approval. So yes, I'm familiar with this.
Thank you. And to your knowledge, was this included as Exhibit A3 to Apache's pre-hearing statement?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay. So at this time, I would move for admission of Apache Exhibits A1, A2, A3, A5, and A6. And we did cover A4? Okay.
We will cover it later.
Okay. I'm sorry, and A, which is the resume.
Okay, Mr. Tremaine, do you have any objection to that?
No objections.
Okay, it'll be entered.
Okay.
There-
Mr. Chair, this witness is available for cross-examination.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Mr. Tremaine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Goldberg, I have some questions for Mr. Baker. I'll be much more brief than we were with Mr. Bull this morning. Good afternoon now, I guess, Mr. Baker. I want to ask you, do you recall the testimony this morning in which we were examining a map of chloride contaminations in groundwater from December of 2023?
Yeah, there was many maps, so
Sure.
yeah, maybe.
I'm going to just direct you in a minute. I'd like to share my screen and refer to Apache Exhibit B packet page 170 of 733. This was a map I was just referring to, reflecting the area for which we had groundwater monitoring wells in December of 2023. Would you agree with that?
Yes,
And you were with Apache at that time, correct?
yes.
What was your last date with Apache?
12/31/2024.
Okay, thank you. Are you generally familiar with Apache's operations in the East Bryanbury Drinkard unit as reflected on this map?
Somewhat. I'm familiar with the area. My role is not really in production, so I'm familiar with the landscape, but maybe not at a technical level as a production engineer or something of that nature.
Okay. If I said that it was OCD's understanding that all of the well pads or wells represented on this map were all operated by Apache, would you have any reason to disagree with that?
No, I think that would be a fair statement. I don't know that I could say all of them, but I would agree that a large portion of them would be.
As of the time that you departed from Apache, are you aware of any of the wells or any associated facility that would be present as depicted on this map, having been potentially transferred, sold, or assigned to any other operator?
Yes,
Is the East Bryanbury Drinkard unit number 37, has that been sold to another operator?
that would be my understanding.
has Apache, when would that assignment have occurred?
My understanding, the closing of that would have been at the 12/31/2024, my last day at Apache.
Okay. Are you able to tell us in the commission what operator is going to be taking over operation of the EBDU number 37?
I'm not sure. I'd like to. I would have to. I don't know that if I have a legal obligation or not. I would have to look into that.
That's fine, Mr. Baker. Thank you. Thank you for that. I think we have what we need. Do you agree with the earlier testimony that chlorides do not naturally break down in the environment?
Yes.
Right. I'm going to move back now to your exhibit. If I could, oops, pardon, direct you to page 16 of your exhibit packet A, 16 of 515. Would you agree with me that, would you recognize this this document, Mr. Baker?
Yes, sir.
And this is the initial C-141 regarding the release that you identified to and previously testified about, correct?
Correct.
Would you agree that on this document, when you filed it, you marked that at the time there were not observed impacts to groundwater? Let me rephrase that question. I apologize, there's double negative. When you filed this document, did you or Apache indicate that there were impacts to groundwater?
I would say that at that time, it wasn't definitively clear. I don't feel that as the project, I don't think I've at any statement that I've made in this process that I was not concerned about the possibility of groundwater being impacted, but I don't know that it was definitive at the time of this paperwork being filed.
Understood. So would you agree that the data from subsequent groundwater monitoring has necessarily changed that analysis that there may be impacts to groundwater since the time this was filed?
I would say that yes, the data shows that.
And you may have heard earlier today some testimony regarding the questions and testimony regarding the approvals sent by Mr. Billings to Apache regarding the C-141s and remediation plan. I don't want to belabor going through those exhibits, but would you agree, consistent with that prior testimony and exhibits, that each of those approvals from OCD clearly indicated that Apache would have ongoing liability for remediating the release if their operations and plans failed to adequately investigate and remediate contamination that may pose a threat to groundwater?
Object to the extent it calls for a legal conclusion.
I disagree. I'm simply asking Mr. Baker if he agrees to the content of the emails notifying, like the actual language in the email notifying Apache of their ongoing liability.
Can you rephrase it for him, Mr. Tremaine?
Sure. Well, maybe what I want to do is just go back to the exhibit. Six. So we've discussed this in other contexts earlier. Mr. Baker, I'm directing you to page 426 out of 515 of Apache's Exhibit Packet A. Are you familiar with this email?
Yes, sir.
And do you agree that the language I previously quoted is present in this approval and notifies OCD of its ongoing liability?
In my experience, that what you're referencing there would be in every approval letter that I've received. That's pretty accustomed with many projects I've worked with. So it's kind of a stamped thing. So yes.
So it's fair to say that OCD consistently has notified you in your experience that if the information changes, that you as the operator may have to go back and do additional work, additional remediation, additional delineation. Is that fair?
Yeah, yes, I would say it's fair if more data comes along that we have an obligation to address the situation. Or better
Great.
yet, investigate the situation.
Pardon me. Thank you, Mr. Baker. Give me 1 second. I think I'm done. And I am done with my cross-examination. Thank you, Mr. Baker, for your time. We appreciate it.
Mr. Mullenberg, did you have any redirect for?
No redirect.
Okay, excellent. Commissioners, we'll start with you. Commissioner Bloom, any questions?
Mr. Chair, no questions. Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Mpoma, any questions?
Yes, I do have some quick ones. Mr. Baker, so you said that at the time of the first release, you had a fair idea on the volumes, but you decided to report unknown. Can you share with the commission what was the volume, if you can?
Let me look. I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but it would have been under 100 barrels with some recovered. That was the initial reported to me from the production team in the field. After further analyzing the situation, I realized that I really have no idea what was lost.
Okay.
And so I felt like it was the appropriate stance to be put into that more stringent criteria of delineation in regards to OCD requirement. And that's why I had marked it as unknown.
Okay. So in your remediation plan, the delineation and remediation plan, Apache decided to drill 2 monitoring wells, the one on top and then the one on the south.
Yes, we were concerned about the windmill, and that I believe that happened pretty early on, and so we did TM1. We wanted to see if we had any migration because we wanted to do our best to protect the landowner's windmill, and that was the purpose of that. And then we put an upgradient well to try to see if we could get an idea of if there was some background, which would be typical. But it was a safety measure to see if we were starting to impede on the landowner's well.
So the first 2 wells, the first 2 monitoring wells, that was more or less initiated by Apache.
Yes, I believe so.
So aside the 2 wells that Apache initiated in their initial plans, I want to know, was there anything else that was initiated by Apache other than the division more or less directing Apache to drill more wells?
To answer your question, we did a lot of work in that time period. That was we did I believe we did a pretty large excavation in the low-lying area, the playa. I'm not 100% sure if it's a playa or not, but it's been referenced that way. And I believe we dug that to 10 foot I wanted to get that out of there. We hauled that off. That was initial. The landscape of that area, there was a lot of mesquite, and it was hard to get into it and access the entire spill area, and it was in kind of a sandy condition. So we tried, I believe, multiple approaches. We tried backhoe delineation to see the depth. Eventually, we brought in some soil bores. We had a soil bore machine to try to determine groundwater. We did a lot of things where we could get access to it, and when we implemented the remediation plan, it was acknowledged that the 4 foot that there was, it was significantly deeper contamination, and that the attempt there was to protect groundwater. And if we can get to the 4 foot, get the liner in, that I've done many times with the agency and multiple spills before. And so, answering your question, we did do a lot of delineation and understanding. Originally, we thought the depth to groundwater inside the playa was a lot shallower than it turned out to be. And so initially, I got some bad data. One drilling company said, we think it could be 15 feet, and that's why we started digging to 10. I wanted it out of there. Once we got a better understanding that it was deeper than that, we were getting more in the 40s. That was already dug out. We started taking a more, logical approach and trying to understand it. Go ahead.
Oh, well, so are you saying that Apache do own multiple wells in this area? Let's say injection wells in the area. Is that correct?
I'm not sure.
So
I'm referring to the spill.
no, I'm saying that I'm asking if Apache owns some production or let's say injection wells around that area.
Yes, that would be correct. They would be how can I put it? They might be injection, they might be producing.
Exactly.
It depends.
So is it not surprising when Apache says that we do not know the underground source of drinking water? I mean, you have wells in the area, so you don't know the depth of the underground source of drinking water?
That's a valid question. I have never been able to look at a drilling log and determine that definitively. Now there might be a way to do that. I'm just not aware of it.
Okay. So I'm trying to get to a point where I can fully understand. So based on the cross on the first witness, so NMOCT established that if it was not their intervention of asking Apache to drill multiple wells, monitoring wells, we wouldn't know the extent of the contamination. Is that a fair statement?
I would say that's a fair statement. I would also like to, so the original scope, we got the remediation plan, we installed the 4 wells. We submitted that data we got the plan approved, we submitted to OCD, they closed it, we continued monitoring the 4 wells. At a later date, the agency came back to me and asked that to reevaluate the situation, in which I accommodated them, and that's how we got to the more wells. But at that time, I had no reason other than them inquiring that we were still monitoring and trying to see where it was going. So that would be a correct statement. But I just want to be clear on that. The dynamic that changed was not internal from Apache. That was OCD asking us to look into it further, in which we accommodated them and led to realizing there's a larger problem.
Yeah, so before you left Apache, do you believe that the extent of this contamination, the delineation is really, really accurate now?
I would say this because I'm not 100. When I look at it from my perspective, from the soil remediation standpoint, the surface blueprint of this spill We had a good understanding of the lateral extent because of all of our clean wall data, which we collected a lot of samples. I knew we had a problem with depth. So the question you're asking me, it depends on if I believe that the current situation is absolutely 100% being contributed from this spill. I cannot answer that. I can't say it isn't, but I can't say it is because my data doesn't suggest that.
Well, so are you suggesting that there could be something that might have happened, not necessarily from this 100-barrel spill that really more or less went on? It could be something more deeper than that.
I would have to, I don't know that. Part of the reason the team recommended the soil bore towards the junction is that was the one area I felt like I might have a lack of delineation with depth, and that would give me a lot of information to see if the current situation is more directed to this release or another issue to explore.
So from all the testimonies that we've heard today, I'm not sure if we fully understand the extent. You know, if you look at the well 23, the TMW 23, TMW 24, and even some of the other wells, there is still some contamination there. So I'm not sure if Apache can really defend that the situation has been contained.
I could see that argument.
So if you can see the argument, then I want to know. So and based on the earlier testimony, it sounds like NMOCD is asking for about 40 wells total. So now you have about 23 or so, 24. They're asking more to about 40. And I don't know if it is the next witness who will be showing me the map. Is the next witness, right?
The next witness, yeah.
Okay, let me pause here. Thank you. Thank you. But one more. I just want to ask you, so based on what we know now, do you believe that the initial remediation plan was effective
I do.
and successful?
Yes, I do.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry. It keeps on going, right? I just have one question to dovetail off of Dr. Mpoma's. Do you think the remediation plan is sufficient?
Oh, yeah.
From my experience, there's definitely a problem going on at the subsurface.
Okay.
We have chlorides there. Do I think from the spill and the footprint that I saw and the liner that I installed should have addressed any further contaminate getting into the groundwater table? What happened at the time of the event? That's speculation. I don't know how much because I don't know how much was lost. But with that being said, do I think the liner in place is adequate? I would say yes. And my assumption is the chlorides we're seeing in the water table, if they're coming from that release, they probably happened before the remediation occurred.
Okay.
That would be my guess.
Okay. Thank you. I have no further questions. Anybody have Mr. Mullenberg?
Nothing further.
No? Mr. Tremaine?
Nothing further.
Okay. Mr. Baker, thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Before we call your next witness, do we need a break? Yeah, I think we need let's take about 10-minute break. We can come back at around 2:30. Excellent. Thank you. Sorry for the delay. We're back on the record. Mr. Mullenberg, I think we're ready for your next witness. Turn your microphone on. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm hard to create new habits. Mr. Chair, Commissioners, Apache calls its next witness, John Grams.
Mr. Grams, if you'll come have a seat, please. If you'll turn on your microphone, and then our court reporter will swear you in.
All right.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you provide today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Excellent. Mr. Grams has been sworn in. Mr. Mullenberg, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Grams, would you please state your name and business address?
Yeah, John Grams. I'm at 5847 50th Street in Lubbock, Texas.
On whose behalf are you providing testimony?
Apache Corporation.
And what relationship do you have with Apache?
My company, Terracon, has a consulting agreement with Apache, so I'm a consultant to Apache.
Okay. I think we covered this, but would you just briefly talk about the timing of and circumstances under which you and your firm were engaged to consult with Apache on this project?
Yeah, so I became involved in late July, August of 2024. I think earlier someone had commented Larson Associates went out of business and the project was handed to Terracon at that time.
Okay. Did you submit a written resume describing your education, work history, and experience for this proceeding?
Yes, I did. I believe it is Exhibit C.
And to your knowledge, is that exhibit current and true and accurate?
Yes.
Would you briefly summarize for the commissioners your educational history and technical qualifications?
Yeah, I have a bachelor's degree in geology and a master of science in geology. I'm a registered professional geologist in the states of Minnesota and Texas.
Okay. To your knowledge, does New Mexico have a registered geologist program?
No, I don't believe it does.
Could you please summarize your past employment history?
Sure. I began consulting in 1988 as a field geologist doing groundwater and soil investigations, sampling wells, sampling soil, drilling wells, that kind of thing. After 4 years, I went to Amoco Oil Company and worked for Amoco BP for 7 years, mostly in compliance, a few other roles. Then I returned to consulting, and for the past 25 years, I've been doing various consulting assignments, mostly site investigation, remediation, soil, groundwater, emergency response kind of work.
Thank you. Could you please give us a little additional description of your experience and qualifications as it relates particularly to groundwater contaminant delineation?
Yeah, I've worked on literally hundreds of projects over the years, the past 30 some years, in a capacity ranging from, as I say, a field geologist executing the work in the field to project manager directing the work, and more recently, more as a project director providing senior oversight.
Okay. And could you describe in general the purposes of groundwater contaminant delineation?
Yeah, the broad goal is to try to evaluate whether there are risks posed to human health and the environment by, I'm thinking in terms of industrial releases. Is that the direction you're? Yeah. So we're looking at trying to define the extent and magnitude of any impacts to the environment, soil, groundwater, surface waters, if it's applicable.
Okay. What kinds of technical and scientific expertise are needed for groundwater contaminant delineation?
Geology is an important factor. Hydrogeology, chemistry is important in understanding the movement of contaminants in the subsurface. Some biology.
You mentioned hydrogeology. Could you expand just a little bit on your experience or qualifications as it relates to hydrogeology?
I've worked on many projects where we put in a wide range of wells, well networks, recovery wells, design recovery systems. There's methods of injecting air, sparge, fluid extraction, and that's the kind of work that I've done most of my career.
Okay. Is groundwater flow mapping, could you describe that? And is that an aspect of hydrology and hydrogeology?
Yep, absolutely. If you have, I think Barrett mentioned in his testimony, you need at least 3 control points, survey in the elevation of the water table, and it's really a matter of looking at the surface of the water table. You would say the potentiometric surface of the water table to determine which way groundwater is moving. And that's a part of what we do on any project.
Have the methods of groundwater flow mapping changed in recent years?
There's an increased use of computers. So, when I started, we would hand draw all of our contours, triangulate and draw your own contours. Now it's done largely through software that does a kriging program that creates contours. So yeah, it's changed.
Okay. At this point, I would tender this witness as an expert in geology, hydrology, and groundwater contaminant delineation.
Mr. Tremaine? Any objections?
None.
Okay, he shall be entered.
Thank you. Are you involved in groundwater contaminant delineation regarding a release relating to an area around the EBDU number 37 well?
Yes, I am.
And you've answered part of this, but when did you become involved and what is your role?
I became involved in, I guess it would be August, and my role is as senior geologist on the project supporting our project team.
Okay. Obviously you weren't there, but are you familiar with Apache's preparation and implementation of a remediation plan early on in response to the release?
I've reviewed the documents, yes.
And you're familiar with the remediation plan that's been admitted as Apache Exhibit A2?
Yes, I am.
Do you have any particular comments on the remediation plan and its implementation as it relates to groundwater contaminant delineation in response to the release?
No, I think it was a standard approach for this type of a release, focused on soil initially, soil delineation, excavation, backfilling. There was some with the windmill, there was some concern, so 2 wells were put in, which isn't usually done, but the plan is it was a standard approach.
Okay. You mentioned the windmill and a couple of monitoring wells. Are you familiar then with the initial groundwater monitoring requirements or commitments related to the release?
Well, I know that they sampled the well, and the initial samples were for BTEX, benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene, xylene, chloride, TDS. I believe that TMW2 had some chloride in TDS. One in the windmill, I think we're okay.
Okay.
They're below standards when I say that.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Let me just ask a question specific to the windmill. Is there much information in the record about the well associated with the windmill, its construction depths and the like?
No, we have not been able to find well records for that well, so I'm not sure how it was constructed or how deep it is. There's well records that have not been made available to me.
Okay. And is it your understanding that the initial remediation plan considered the initial groundwater monitoring results from the first 2 wells?
I believe it did, yeah.
Okay. And is it your understanding that the division approved Apache's remediation plan?
I believe they approved it with the conditions, and the conditions involved installing 2 additional monitoring wells, if I
Okay.
recall correctly.
Yeah, conditions, I think we've discussed your other witnesses, the circumstances about those, but
Yeah.
there were commitments at that point in time for 4 monitoring wells.
Right.
Right. Have you reviewed the initial annual groundwater monitoring report? And if so, do you have any comments on that regarding particular contaminants of concern?
No, well, the initial report was based on the 4 wells. And so they've identified chlorides and TDS, or total dissolved solids, as the primary chemicals of concern. They did sample for BTEX in all of the wells. There was one detection of toluene, or one date had toluene detected in, I think, 3 wells at very low levels, just marginally above the laboratory detection limits. It's never been repeated, but that did occur. The 4 wells was enough to get a general groundwater flow direction. They mapped it flowing south to southwest. That's what the report showed.
Okay. And is it your understanding that annual groundwater monitoring report was provided as Apache Exhibit C1 with its pre-hearing statement?
That's correct.
Okay. Are you familiar with the New Mexico Water Quality Control Commission groundwater quality standards, and particularly the classification of standards for chloride and total dissolved solids?
Yes, I believe they are in Chapter 20 of New Mexico Administrative Code.
20.6.2.3103, does that ring a bell?
That sounds right.
Okay.
Thank you.
And are there different groups of contaminants or classification of contaminants under those standards?
Yeah, the primary drinking water standards are health risk-based standards based on toxicology type information for chemicals such as benzene. Chloride and TDS are not included in that group. There are secondary standards for chloride, TDS, regulated just a little bit differently.
Okay. And
they're,
when
yeah.
when you say secondary standards, is it your understanding that those are described in the WQCC rules as standards for domestic water supplies?
Yes, and they're kind of aesthetic parameters or water characteristics that get to the suitability of drinking water. So nobody wants to drink salt water, but it's not necessarily toxic, right?
Yeah, and you're thinking, or you mentioned secondary standards. Is this set of standards similar to EPA's secondary drinking water standards?
That's where I pulled that term. I'm not sure the New Mexico term offhand. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
So we were talking a little bit about the initial annual groundwater monitoring report, and I think this is toward the end of December of 2020. Do you know if that report was approved?
It's my understanding that it was approved, and yeah.
And is there a written record of that approval in Apache Exhibit C1?
That's what I understand, yes.
Okay. Are you aware of some expansion of groundwater monitoring beginning in 2022?
Yeah, there were 2 additional wells put in, TMW6, TMW5, and TMW6. There were some communications between Apache and OCD that led to those 2 wells, I believe. I think it's Exhibit B1 is my understanding.
Okay, thank you. With that expanded monitoring to those 2 additional wells, have you reviewed results obtained from those wells, and are there any particular conclusions you draw from those?
Well, both TDS and chloride exceeded the groundwater quality standards in both of those wells.
Okay. Is it your understanding that groundwater monitoring was expanded once again in early 2023?
Yes.
And could you describe your understanding and any results you're aware of that phase of the groundwater monitoring?
Well, so my understanding is that there were initially 4 additional wells put in, TMW 7, 8, 9, and 10. And based on the results of those sampling wells, Apache and OCD discussed the results, is my understanding. and agreed to go back and put in additional wells. And that led to the 14 additional wells being installed in November, December.
Okay, so let me back up quickly to the first 4 wells you mentioned in around April of 2023. Is there a scope of work for those additional wells, particularly Apache Exhibit C2 to the pre-hearing statement?
Yes, I believe that's correct. Yes.
Okay. So you started to mention an additional expansion of groundwater monitoring subsequent to this. What was your understanding regarding what precipitated that expansion and how it came about?
Well, they put in the 4 wells, and wells numbers 7 and 8 exceeded groundwater quality standards. I think 9 and 10 were below standards. My understanding is that there was a discussion between OCD and Apache to go out into the field with a drill rig and do the best that you could to collect field data while drilling to determine where to place the next wells. So my understanding is that it was a little bit of a free-flowing work plan. It wasn't a specific go and install 14 wells. It was go and define the plume, and Apache used field titration to measure chloride in the field, which is, it's a step above qualitative. It's nothing like a lab, but it gives you an idea of whether chlorides are present or not. And on that basis, they installed a series of wells. They would first put them in just like an inner ring suburb, put in some wells closest to your source, and then step out trying to find the perimeter of the plume.
Okay.
And that led to that additional 14 wells.
So thank you. So is it your understanding that before that drilling campaign had started, Apache and the division had discussed something on the order of 5 or 6 wells that would be needed as a minimum?
Yeah, and I'm just not that familiar with that particular work plan.
Okay.
So,
okay.
yes.
And then, as you've described it, Apache drilled some wells, collected some field data, and then continued to drill the additional wells based on the field data.
Yeah, they spent, I think, nearly 4 weeks in the field with their drill rig.
Okay. And I think you said that resulted in a total of 13 additional wells. Is that right?
I thought it was 14, but you probably have better numbers than I do.
Well, my math is always bad. So I think, are we talking about the wells that have been identified as wells TMW 11 through 24?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. And did after the field work with these wells, I think Mr. Bowl has described the well development and then some additional sampling and analysis that took place regarding, I believe, all of the wells at that time. Do you know if that's correct?
They did an initial round. My understanding is an initial round of groundwater samples in December, and that would include measurement of water levels and samples. It's usually done. You measure water levels first, then you collect your samples, and then another round in March. And those are the figures that we've been looking at in some of the reports.
Yeah, and I think with those figures, you're talking about the groundwater monitoring report that I think is dated March 27th of 2024.
Yes, I believe that's Apache Exhibit B2.
Apache Exhibit B2, and I think Mr. Tremaine was asking some questions
Yes.
from that report. So at this point, could you give us a little more description of your impression of the results regarding the groundwater monitoring as discussed in the March 2024 report?
Yeah, so at this point, we have a network of 24 monitoring wells, and that does a pretty good job of defining the flow in the aquifer. So it's to the south-southwest. There's a few perturbations that we've talked about. We can look at a little bit more, but the flow is to generally south-southwest. Chlorides, the Well number 17 was identified as clearly having the highest chloride of any of the other wells. And then there are a number of wells surrounding 17 that are also sort of high. So there seems to be a groundwater high at that point on the property. Yeah.
And do you recall in this report what the value was for chlorides in well TMW 17
I want to say it was 5,000 something milligram per liter.
in that range? Okay. Did that sampling and particularly the water level measurements indicate anything that was noted at that point regarding potential high elevations of groundwater and lower elevations of groundwater?
I think it was the March sampling that identified a groundwater high at TMW 4, I believe. I don't think that that showed up in the December data, but I'd have to look at the maps to be
Okay.
100% certain.
And we perhaps can do that. I would just ask if you noted any potential errors when you took over the project and reviewed that mapping.
Yeah, so and one of the wells that showed a real low point from March, I think it was around TMW 19. If you look, they recorded the data as 3360.88. In the table is recorded as 3361. So there does appear to be a low point there, but it's accentuated in appearance by some incorrect data on the map.
Okay. So are you generally familiar with Apache's and the division's discussions following receipt and analysis of the March 2024 groundwater monitoring report?
Yeah, I believe that a report was put together with Larson and Associates that all that data was presented in it was presented as a work plan, but it also presented the data, I believe.
And are you referring there to the May 8th, 2024 work plan?
Yes.
And is that included as Apache Exhibit C3 with Apache's pre-hearing statement?
I believe that's correct.
Okay. And do you have any other comments that you'd like to make about the content of that plan at this point?
Not really.
Okay.
No.
Are you aware of what happened following the division's review and action on the May 8th, 2024 plan?
Okay, so yeah, so their plan involved, I was getting a couple of things mixed up, I think.
Sure,
They
sure.
had a Larson report and then they had a proposed work plan. So there were two significant documents that went in April and May, I believe.
Okay. I've probably confused you here. So I think we got up to the May 8th, 2024 scope of work.
Okay,
And then I was starting to talk about OCD's review and action on that. And I think you mentioned something about a scope of work, but were you thinking of, or perhaps you were at a different time frame, thinking of the conditions of approval?
well, their initial scope of work involved proposed installing 5 wells, TMW 25 through 29. If we're on the same page in their May 8th, 2024 scope.
Okay.
And 1 soil boring and a pump test.
And then is it your understanding that the division reviewed that report and after several weeks, I suppose, toward the end of July, the division approved, but subject to additional conditions?
Right. So my understanding is that that scope of work was what they had kind of discussed and agreed on with meetings. This proposal or scope document was prepared, and then the OCD approved it conditionally, and the condition involved installing an additional, I think, 14 wells.
Okay.
In addition to the 5 that were proposed.
Okay. And is it your understanding that after some back and forth between Apache and the division regarding the conditions of approval that Apache subsequently proposed some but not all of the additional monitoring requested or required by the OCD's conditions of approval?
Yeah, so then there was a follow-up proposal that included the original 5 Apache proposed wells, plus 2 of the wells that OCD had requested, for a total of 7, plus 4 soil borings to be put in locations mutually agreed with OCD's input. And then a pumped aquifer characterization pump test to better understand conditions in the aquifer.
And is that proposal described in Apache Exhibit B4?
Yes, I
Okay.
believe so.
So we're almost ready to get to the maps. But before we do that, I want to cover one other thing. We've now gotten to September of last year. Did Terracon on Apache's behalf conduct a new round of groundwater sampling and analysis following submission of the September 2024 proposal?
Yeah, after the OCD decided not to talk anymore, it was decided to conduct one more round of groundwater samples to get a 4th quarter. So we went out end of October, early November, measured water levels and collected groundwater samples.
Okay. And did your firm Terracon prepare and submit a written report of that round of groundwater monitoring?
Yes, we did. We called it a quarterly groundwater monitoring report.
Okay. And is that report included with Apache's pre-hearing statement as Apache Exhibit C3?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay. And in that report, did Terracon provide some updated mapping based on the results of this latest round of groundwater monitoring?
We did. We included depth to water tables that showed depth to water, chemistry, and then we included a groundwater flow map, a groundwater chemistry map for chloride, and a TDS contour map.
Okay. I think we've established this, but Apache's report included an initial groundwater flow map as well as some of the other maps you mentioned. Is that right?
Yes.
Subsequent to the submission of that report, did you review that map and identify some issues that needed to be addressed in an update?
Yeah, yes, we did. TMW 14 on the contour map lists a groundwater elevation. I guess I don't have my note in front of me. Of, I believe, 3366.19. And in looking into the details of this, I realized that one of the tables was incorrectly created. The correct elevation is 3364.19. The groundwater flow map was drawn with the correct number, so the contours and the flow are unchanged, but the label that shows up next to that well is incorrect. And so that needs to be fixed.
Okay. Was that corrected in another map that you prepared and submitted
Oh, I'm
here?
referring to the monitoring report.
Okay.
And
So let me back up a little bit so
Okay.
we make clear what we're trying to do. So there was a map
oh, I see.
with the groundwater monitoring report
Mm.
that was submitted, I think, in early January, right?
Yep.
And that was included in the pre-hearing statement.
Yep.
And then subsequently, you identified some issues and provided a new map, which I think we've labeled as Apache Exhibit C-4.1.
Okay, so there were two map corrections that occurred. The first
Okay.
was we prepared this, I think was Exhibit C-4 map. And I realized the scale was wrong. So it did not include, for example, TMW 25 or TMW 28. It was just zoomed out too far. And it also had one of the wells was the wrong color. It was shown as blue instead of green on my map. So I fixed that, and that's what we submitted. That corrected map was C-4.1.
Oh, good. So,
Okay.
so what you're saying is the difference between the first map that went in with the pre-hearing statement and the corrected map was basically just some labeling, and
Yeah.
is there any technical difference between the
No.
two? Okay.
No.
Did you receive and review some information late yesterday from
Yes.
OCD with comments on some of the groundwater levels as shown in the Exhibit C-4.1 map?
Yeah, and that's what I was referring to.
Okay.
Yeah, with there were two errors. TMW 14 was mislabeled with the wrong elevation. However, the contours were drawn by the software with the correct elevation. So there's no change in substance to the map, but the label has to be changed from 3366.19 to 3364.19.
Okay.
Okay.
And I think we're probably then ready to pull up the map.
Yep.
And get to work on it.
And there is one other correction that I had to
Okay,
make.
yes.
TMW 13, it was pointed out that the elevations were incorrectly calculated. And there was a math error in our spreadsheet, and we took the top of casing elevation for TMW 12, and it was copied into the cells for 13, and that resulted in an error. And so that also has to be corrected. Again, this will change the contours a little bit on the map. It actually will flatten them out a little bit and make it look a little bit more normal. So it removes a little bit of the hump that goes up to the north. We have to fix that, though.
Okay.
It's an error.
So Mr. Chair, if you'd allow us to share the map, I'll first ask Mr. Grams to point out this couple of areas so
Yeah.
we can start with an understanding of that, and then we'll go to the discussion that we've all been waiting for.
Sure. Sheila, can you give him access, please?
Okay.
Okay.
So we'll start at, first of all, this map doesn't show the error at TMW 14. Well, let me just orient you a little bit to this
Yeah.
map, okay?
Yeah.
There's a lot going on here. Kind of apologize for making it so busy, but we were trying to show a lot. First, the green area is the area of impacted soil from the spill. So the spill occurred, the release point was at TMW 7, which is at the easternmost extent of the top of the T. Ran west and down south towards a low point. So the green is the impacted soil that was ultimately remediated, dug up by Apache during their early stage remedial activities. The blue lines are the groundwater contours. So each contour line shows a point of equal elevation on the groundwater surface, and groundwater flows from high to low. So the arrows are showing the general flow direction. The thin yellow lines are chloride iso concentration contours. So this is showing the data from October, November 2024. This is the most recent data. And you can see there's a high point, TMW 17. There's a 10,000 milligram per kilogram contour. There's a 5,000 milligram contour, and so on. The numbers, the red wells on this are the existing monitoring wells. So every red circle is an existing monitoring well, and the number you see is the chloride concentration at that well. So this map doesn't even show the issue with the groundwater mislabeling because it's labeled for chlorides. It does, however, if you want to move the map down just a little bit so I can see TMW 13. Other way, up, I guess. There. So TMW 13, this map was drawn with an incorrect contour, and the effect of fixing that is going to be, you see the 3364.5 line, that and 3365 will drop down and it'll appear more flat. So it doesn't change any conclusions.
Okay.
So we'll fix that.
Is there anything else you want to explain to the commission about the minor changes and the error that might affect this?
No, that's it. Just those two things. Yeah.
So just to summarize, this map reflects the most recently collected groundwater monitoring data, including groundwater levels and chloride values.
Yes. And there is one other feature shown on here, if we want to get real technical on the geology a little bit. And you might want to zoom out a little bit. The fat yellow lines, these are lines that were created by Larson Associates mapping that show the thickness of the aquifer. So the thickness of the Ogallala aquifer can vary quite a bit. It's relatively flat on the top, but the Ogallala sediments were deposited on an erosional surface that has topography, just like looking outside your window, there's hills and valleys. And the yellow lines show where the drill rig hit the bottom confining layer, and it creates almost like a basin. So the top line 10 feet, the Ogallala is only 10 feet thick, then 15, then 20, then deeper. And the image we're getting is of a sort of basin that is, we think, is sort of confining the chlorides and resulting in that shape that we're seeing in the center of the plume.
Okay. In terms of the groundwater flow mapping, Mr. Grams, is there anything in this map based on the latest results that's materially different from the maps with the previous March 2024 results?
It also shows the groundwater high at TMW4, which also showed up on the March 4th map. That feature didn't show up in December. So we're trying to understand that. I think that it may reflect increased infiltration from precipitation in the area of the low-lying area and where it was excavated. That would result in a groundwater high, but I don't know for sure.
Okay. But just generally in terms of the context or the contours and the particularly the groundwater level values, do you recall material differences between this latest map and the previous map?
No, it flows to the southwest, and yeah, so it's not changed. Okay. It's fairly consistent.
So some of the contaminant values have changed, though, right?
Yeah, the values have gone up in some of the wells. I did a little count just recently, and I think there were about half the wells that stayed about the same, and about half the wells it's increased.
Okay. Were there some difference in sampling methods between the March sampling round and the I guess it's the October sampling round?
That's true. We used a passive sampling technique in October, November. They're called hydrous sleeves. I won't get into the details of it, compared to a low flow sampling technique. However, there were a handful of wells that we did low flow during this event because there wasn't sufficient water to get a hydrous sleeve, and we didn't see any correlation or sampling difference. So I don't think that explains the difference, but it was something that was done differently.
Okay.
And we did talk to OCD about that before we did it. So they were aware we were going to change our method.
And that was just something that Terracon recommended as a change from what?
Yeah.
Okay. Um, So with all of that in mind, I'd now like to review with you a comparison of Apache's proposal to conduct additional groundwater contaminant delineation with the OCD conditions of approval. And I'm going to break this down into certain areas on this map. And I'd like to start with the southeast part of the area covered by the map, or I believe it would be the lower right-hand part of the map. Do you see that?
Yep.
Okay. Uh, With respect to groundwater flow, how would you describe this particular area in relation to the release point, as well as the areas identified with the highest chloride concentrations?
This is down gradient and cross gradient from those. So down and a little bit over.
Okay, and what does that mean in terms of, say, contaminant transport and such?
Well, over time, you would expect that these would be the wells much far in the future that would show impacts if contaminants keep moving.
Okay,
They would be the last to show an impact. It'll take a while for groundwater to get here. Water moves very slowly. A groundwater model might tell you how quickly it would take to get there. We haven't done that yet, but yeah.
is there some more information you would need to collect to do any quantitative groundwater modeling?
Yeah, so, this is the Ogallala Aquifer. It's fine grained sediment, sand, both alluvial or river deposits and aeolian, which are wind deposits. It can vary in the hydraulic conductivity. Essentially the permeability changes from one location to the next, depending upon what the sediments are like. So an aquifer pump test will give us practical information that'll help us determine how to set up a proper model and understand it.
Right, and that pump test is part of Apache's proposal.
That's why we proposed that.
Okay.
Yes.
And as far as you know, the division hasn't objected to that.
No, I think that must have been something they've talked about on and off, I would assume.
Okay. So from Apache's perspective, speaking again to the southeast part of the area at issue, what is the purpose and need for additional groundwater contaminant delineation in this area?
Yeah, so this is, and one thing this map shows, you'll see that the bottom yellow chloride contour line is dashed in the southeast there. That means it's kind of inferred. We don't have good enough data to draw that line really. And so the additional wells, first I'll point out the blue wells are the wells that Apache has proposed. The green wells are the wells that OCD has requested, okay, on this map. So if red is existing, green is OCD requested, blue is Apache proposed. So down in this area, and there's a little twist to it, but TMW 31, for example, is a well that's far down gradient that we have proposed. That was also proposed by OCD as TMW 42. So that's a well we agree on.
Okay.
Okay.
So just to clarify, and I think I understand this right, but maybe not. OCD proposed it in their conditions of approval as well number 42.
Yes.
Okay. And then Apache picked up that proposal and said, yeah, we agree, but Apache's calling it in their plan TMW 31.
We agreed. We didn't have wells in between and we wanted it to be in sequence. So it had a different number on it.
Right. And one other thing, I don't know if this will come up as we're going through, but I think there's some duplication of numbering in the OCD conditions of approval. I don't know if you picked that up in your maps or not.
I think 41 might have been listed twice or something.
Okay.
But and there is one thing, Sam, there's an additional well, a blue well 25. There you go. That's a far down gradient. So
And I think we'll probably talk about that in the next group.
Okay,
Just
okay.
to avoid
Yep,
confusion.
sorry. Yep.
So yeah, thank you.
Charging ahead.
To summarize, we've got two wells here shown with two different numbers. Apache TMW 31 with the 42 by it, and Apache TMW 30 with the 39 by it, and Apache and the division are in agreement on those, the need for those wells and their locations, right?
That's correct.
So talk me through what's going on with the blue well labeled TMW 26 and the green well labeled TMW 38.
Yeah, OCD requested number 38. We had already proposed 26, and we feel that provides all of the downgrading control and information we need there, and we just don't think 38 is necessary.
So you think TMW 26 is a preferable location to serve that purpose?
Yep, it provides downgradient, outer control, and I think that should be sufficient.
Okay. And would well, in your view, well TMW 38 provide any additional value?
I don't believe it does. I think that we, with the well network that we're looking at and the existing wells, we'll know all we need to know down in that corner.
Okay. So just to is it fair then to summarize that in this southeast area, there's agreement on 2 well locations, and there's some disagreement on the location and perhaps an additional well that the division might want in this area, and I'm talking about TMW 26 and 38. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Fair.
Anything else that you would like to note about this particular area of the map?
No.
Okay. Then let's move to the southwest part of the impact area. So we've scrolled, and now we're showing. We may want to go down just a little bit, so we pick up 25.
Yeah, that's
probably right there.
There you are.
So we're talking about the lower left-hand part of the map here, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So moving to the southwest part, how would you describe this area with regard to groundwater flow and in relation to the release point and also the areas identified with the highest chloride concentrations?
This is down gradient, quite some distance from the release point.
Okay. And from Apache's perspective, what is the purpose and need for additional groundwater contaminant delineation in this area?
We just want to be entirely sure that we have the furthest southern extent of the plume defined. And, we feel like 24 and 23 do a pretty good job of that. 23 at 1,000, you can argue, is probably, we need to step out, thus 25 further south. I have to mention 31 because it's also similar purpose. But the point is to make sure that we go far enough that we have an absolute downgradient well.
Okay. And in this area, is Apache proposing any additional monitoring wells other than TMW 25?
Well, I mean, I kind of put 31 almost in that category, but it's 25 is the downgradient well.
Okay. So in your opinion, is the additional monitoring well proposed by Apache for this area adequate to complete groundwater contaminant delineation in this area?
I believe it is, yes.
Okay. So let's turn to the green wells. What wells have OCD required under its conditions of approval in this area, and what is your understanding of why those are being required?
Well, they requested TMW 41 as a downgradient well to provide additional delineation between 24 and 23. And, we just feel that 25 provides the downgradient control and there's no real value in 41. Not needed.
Okay. So let's turn to well TMW 40, the green well labeled there. So the same question, what's your understanding of the OCD's reasons for including that well per the conditions of approval, and what are your comments on that?
Yeah, they would like, they felt that we should have a well in between 18 and 19. And when I look at the existing well network with 24, 23, 19, 18, and the proposed wells of 31, 30, 26, I feel like we have the area well enough defined.
Okay. Are you aware of any other reason that, at least from Apache's viewpoint, why you might want to consider a well at TMW 40?
Not really, no.
Okay. Okay. Is it fair to say, in your view, Apache's view, that if you put a well at the location of TMW 25, that's adequate to complete groundwater delineation in this area?
We sure hope so, yes.
And in your view, wells TMW 40 and 41 in this area aren't necessary?
I don't believe they will provide any additional information that directs what we do about this issue.
Okay. So let's move up in the map and talk about the middle, up a little more. Is that about right?
Yep.
Okay. How would you describe this particular area, particularly in relation to contaminant concentrations?
Well, this is the area that shows the highest concentrations in the whole area, as evidenced by 17, 14, 15, 18, even bounded by 5, 6, 20, has its kind of surrounded. So this is the area of highest chloride concentrations.
And do you have any comments about this area as it relates to the point of release?
Well, this is kind of down and over just a little bit from the point of the release. The point of release is, I guess if we move the map a little bit, we would see, TMW 7. So it's down gradient. We've speculated, we're acting on the assumption that the release at TMW 7 location is what's caused this. And that's why we are proposing 27 to be in between the two, to see if there's a connection. We're expecting to see a high chloride at TMW 27. Time will tell.
Mr. Grams, we've had a little testimony on this earlier today, and by Mr. Bowl, I believe, and I think you were present for that. But do contaminants always follow a path from the release point right in line with groundwater flow direction, or are there other geologic features that can affect how that operates?
Yeah, as Barrett alluded, the stratigraphy, the geology of the site can have a major influence on how contaminants migrate downward through soil. So there's roughly 40 or 50 foot column of soil between the surface and the aquifer, and differences in permeability of the materials can direct how things flow.
So can that factor affect whether a particular location is directly down gradient from a point of release when you're looking strictly at groundwater flow?
Yeah, I mean, it can be very complicated.
Okay. Does Apache propose any additional monitoring wells for groundwater contaminant delineation in this area?
Well, so we proposed monitoring well 27. And the proposal is to install that as a large diameter well to allow pumping. And depending upon what we find there, that may or may not be an appropriate place for recovery. It's put in as a monitoring well, but a large diameter well. We're also proposing 4 soil borings to look at soil from the ground surface down that should give us an idea if there's another point of a surface release, we should be able to find it that way.
So in your view, if well TMW 27 is installed as Apache proposed, would that complete groundwater contaminant delineation in this area?
Well, yeah, this is all central interior to the plume. We have wells with low concentrations on all sides of this. So this is defined and constrained by lower wells that show lower concentration. And all of the wells that are proposed are interior to the plume, and I don't think are going to change our view of that plume much.
So when you say all the wells that are proposed, are you now talking about the wells that are included in the division's conditions of approval?
Yeah, I'm looking at 34, 35, 36, and 37.
Okay. So those are all wells that would be required if the commission approves the division's conditions of approval.
Yep.
Okay. And what are your comments on these particular well locations and in relation to your understanding of why the division has included them in its conditions?
Well, I think that my understanding is that they're looking just for more definition in the area of high chlorides, potentially looking for other sources. And when I look at the map, I see 14, 15, 17, the other surrounding wells. I feel it's already defined.
Are you aware of any information that suggests that there may be additional sources of chloride contamination in this area?
I'm not. I'm acting under the assumption that the release up at the junction box is the source of this.
Okay. Can you rule out the possibility that there are any other sources in this area?
No, absolutely not.
So you're just not aware of anything?
Yep. Yeah.
You're just not aware of any information that suggests that there would be a source?
That's correct.
Okay. I think you've indicated already that in Apache's view, the addition of well TMW 27, which obviously has another purpose, would be sufficient to conclude groundwater contaminant delineation in this area?
Yes, well, we hope so, but every well we put in will inform future, just like your caveat that's put in every email. I mean, we recognize there may be additional steps required based on what we find here.
Okay. And conversely, is it your view that the 4 additional wells required by the division's conditions of approval are not necessary to complete groundwater contaminant delineation in this area?
That's correct. I think it is already defined in that area.
Okay. So lastly, let's move to the northern part of the area shown by this map.
There we are.
Is that good?
Yep.
I think we've covered everything there. So to begin with, would you describe this area in relation to groundwater flow, the location of the release and the location of the highest detected contaminant levels?
Yeah, so these are all, well, most of these wells, this is an up gradient from the release point, up gradient from the center of the plume. If you look at well 28, we certainly expect that to be clean. We feel like MW 12 and 11 are probably too far up gradient to show any impact from that release. It's a little hard to say, but yeah.
Okay.
It's up gradient.
You've listened to some testimony there relating to well TMW 13. We may have covered that a little bit with you. Do you have any particular comments on that well as it relates to being a upgradient or otherwise in relation to the point of release?
Well, I mean, on one level, you look at it, and you wouldn't think that would show any impact from the release, but I was looking at the boring log for MW7, and it noted a large clay lens right about halfway down, and that can be the kind of thing that deflects a release in one direction or another. So it's not out of the question that 13 is showing the results of the release from the junction box.
Okay. What additional monitoring wells has Apache proposed in this area, and what are the reasons for Apache's proposal?
So we proposed 28 and 29 and as 2 upgradient wells, and we proposed that the average chloride concentration in those 2 wells would be used to reflect background conditions.
Okay. Is there any purpose from Apache's perspective to wells in this area other than to establish background conditions?
Well, the only other reason that I could imagine would be to look for other sources of release.
Okay.
But we have no reason to believe anything is up there, but yeah.
Okay. Yeah, you have no reason to believe that there are any sources up here that would be impacting the high chloride areas to the south?
No.
Okay. Let's talk about the additional wells in this area contained in the division's conditions of approval and your thoughts on that. Would you start by just identifying the additional wells in the conditions of approval within this area?
Yep, these are the green wells, TMW 30, TMW 31, 32, 43, and 33.
Okay.
5 wells, yeah.
So why don't you perhaps one by one, or if you want to group them, that's fine. Give us your thoughts on whether or not these 5 additional wells are needed for to complete groundwater contaminant delineation in this area.
Well, the goal up here is to define the uppermost limit and what kind of waters are upgrading and coming onto the site. So if you look at TMW 22, our proposed 29 and 28, that's a nice line of wells at the far upgrading extent. And I think that provides the information we need to know that. So the additional wells, 30, 31, 32, I just don't think they provide any information that's going to change what we do at the plume or how we direct our remediation efforts.
Okay. So is it fair to say that in your view, the 5 wells that are identified in the division's conditions of approval are not necessary to complete groundwater contaminant delineation in this northern area?
Yeah, I do not believe they are.
Okay. So just a few questions here, and we're close to wrapping up. Given the size of this site and its nature, how does the number of monitoring wells, and I guess I should refer to the existing monitoring wells, and the scale of groundwater monitoring at this site compared to other sites within your experience?
Yeah, this is a very extensive network of monitoring wells. When I look at it, it's provided a great deal of information in terms of delineation around the edges. There's a couple of gaps which we're proposing to fill. The contaminant concentrations are well mapped out. I think that it's provided a good understanding of what we see out there. I think the gap now is, how is the aquifer going to behave and what do we do to address it?
Okay. Obviously, as additional groundwater monitoring has been done, there's been a considerable addition of information gained regarding this site. Um, is the time frame for groundwater delineation in this area unusual compared to other sites in which you've been involved?
No, I mean, the first year or two after the release, I think they proceeded cautiously. I think it was a joint decision. But if you look at everything that's been done from the beginning of 2023, they've done a lot. So it's moved at a very fast pace. I mean, the wells the network of wells still only has 3 groundwater runs of samples. And, yeah.
So in your opinion, is the revised plan submitted by Apache in September of